Hey guys, and welcome back. So in this lesson, we're going to give you 5 tips to achieve a higher score in your Ielts speaking exam. Alright guys, tip number 1 is to answer and expand. Now you've probably heard this before, that one-word answers in Ielts are not okay. That is true. We need to expand our answers, and by expand, I mean give more information. Your answers do not have to be really long in the Ielts exam, but certainly give 2 or 3 sentences at least. Part 1, I would recommend 3 sentences. Part 2 obviously is going to be speaking for a much longer time because you have a question card. And in part 3, 3 to 4 sentences is usually okay, but if you can make it a little longer, that's also beneficial. Tip number 2, guys. Try not to repeat the vocabulary that's in the question. For example, if the question is, what do you do in your free time? You could say, in my spare time, in my leisure time. So you're not getting any more marks for repeating that back to the examiner, and it just sounds a little bit low level. So try not to repeat it or use some synonyms. And tip number 3, guys, is to use different tenses and structures. So if the examiner asks a question that's in the present tense, for example, what do you do in your free time? It would be a good idea to try to, when expanding, use a different tense. Maybe give me an example of an activity and when you started doing that in your free time, or you could give me an example of a free time activity that you would like to do in the future and if you think you will do it. With regard to structures, guys, it is important to include some complex structures in your Ielts speaking. We have a lesson on this on our website, so I will link that below. And tip number 4, guys, this is really, really important. Do not rush through your answer. In your answers, you should try to focus on making your communication clear rather than saying things as quickly as you can. First of all, speaking really, really quickly just isn't natural. Even native speakers do not speak as fast as some of my students. Okay, we need to think, guys. We need to think about our answer and focus on the communication rather than focusing on just saying as much as you can, as quickly as you can. Second of all, guys, it's really very, very difficult to have a coherent or understandable answer if you're speaking extremely quickly. This is particularly true for part 3. These questions in part 3 can be quite difficult, so give yourself some time to think. Even a native speaker would need to think about a part 3 question. And you can give yourself some time. So say something like, oh, that's an interesting question. You could say, let me think about that for a minute. You could say, oh, I've never thought about that before. So guys, try to consider your answers rather than just speaking the first thing that you think of, because that usually results in an incoherent answer. And tip number 5, try to use some idiomatic vocabulary or phrasal verbs if appropriate. So with idioms and indeed phrasal verbs, students have heard that you need to use these, but often they use them wrongly. So make sure you're using them in an appropriate place. Again, we have some lessons on phrasal verbs and indeed on idioms on our website, which again I will link below. If you can use idiomatic vocabulary and phrasal verbs correctly, you will get a higher score for vocabulary. But if you use them incorrectly, it just sounds a bit awkward and can actually make your score lower rather than higher. Thank you so much for joining this quick lesson today. I hope those tips are helpful. Good luck with your studies and see you in the next lesson.